G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. Time to go for a bit of a bike ride. If I'd done it earlier on in the day, we would have had a perfectly clear blue sky. If I'd done it yesterday, we would have had a perfectly clear blue sky. But I've been brush cutting, sheet mulching on my next door neighbour's place, to give myself a better chance of stopping any kind of a grass fire that comes up this hill. Because bear in mind, the only time I've ever had to stop a fire, it was out there underneath the base of that leaning tree. So yeah, I think we'll go for a bit of a scenic ride. And I have fiddled around with the straps on this harness and tightened up a couple of them, which I think I neglected to do before the previous ride. So hopefully this should remain framing the horizon rather than sliding down to focus exclusively on the instrument panel of the motorbike, which is a glass cockpit, as they call them, and as such it's sometimes pretty bloody hard to read anything on. Those sheep are in the next paddock. We do still have some in this paddock. Lots of sheep shit on the ground. And a fair bit of erosion. I had 40 millimetres of rain in one big long slow storm on New Year's Eve. And I was pretty happy about that, because before the storm started to rain the previous day, I'd finished doing all the plumbing and hanging the guttering on both sides of the toy shed instead of just one side, which has been there for months. So all of my extra rain on New Year's Eve succeeded in putting nearly 1,000 litres into the prism framed water tank. Mixed cows and sheep at the moment, grazing the neighbours. Kind of difficult to know where to start the discussion, considering the development since, what would it be? Christmas Day last time I did a Rideabout Talkabout video, and once again a lot of the things that I suggested that Trumpy and his new administration were likely to be going to try and do, they have in fact decided to have a crack at. As well as imperiling and threatening Social Security and veterans' pensions and veterans' benefits and Medicare and Medicaid, and wanting to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and getting rid of the National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration. Cash Patel's being appointed to the FBI to close it down. At least that's what he said he wanted to do. Elon Musk and Vivek Swami Bami have crapped in their own nest by saying that the average American is untrainable. There's no point setting up schools to train them to compete with educated Asian migrants on the H-1B visa scheme because the Americans are untrainable. Which is not going over well with the MAGA movement. For a couple of days there, it looked like MAGA couldn't come up with a speaker. And if they didn't have a speaker, there wouldn't be anybody to inaugurate Trumpy. So for a while, it looked like maybe they couldn't make him president. At the moment, Trumpy's biggest boo-hoo sob story is that on the one hand, Judge Merchan in the New York fraud cases where he was covering up the hush money that he paid to silence Stormy Daniels regarding an old liaison that they'd had consensually and he wanted to pay her to shut up about when he was campaigning in 2016. He's been found guilty by a jury on 34 counts. He was due to be sentenced, and Merchan has decided that because he's elected to be president, going to be inaugurated in a couple of weeks, he's just going to discharge that case generally. It's been proved, it's nailed down, he's convicted. He's not going to get any penalty, but he's not going to get the conviction removed from his name either. And apparently Trumpy wants to appeal that. And they're expecting Mr. Bragg, the New York Attorney General, to cross-appeal. So maybe the Court of Appeals will decide, no, you can't completely quash the conviction and we're going to give you a sentence anyway. I don't know what's going to happen there. At the moment, it'd be quite reasonable for anybody who lives in America to say that they're living in a situation where there's lots of law enforcement, but no justice to speak of. Once upon a time, people who worked in what they call the executive branch in democratically operated countries, they used to pride themselves on being apolitical, on not having any party alignment. So when a new administration was elected, that was the political side of it. The story was frank, fearless, neutral, professionally competent advice was what the public servants or the civil servants, the departmental employees, were supposed to give to the administration, regardless of the political flavour of the administration and who they voted for. That setup has been consistently whittled away and eroded all around the world since, a bit difficult to say when. Late 70s, early 80s it started to appear. By the 1990s it was real bad. Instead of a new government coming into office and being a little bit guided by the people who'd been administering the policies of the previous government, so there was a sense of smooth, seamless transition and continuity in foreign and domestic policy, we started getting this business of the new broom sweeps clean, and everybody who knows what they're doing gets shown the door and given a golden parachute to head off and become a lobbyist or get a job on a board of directors of some large company which is bidding for government contracts. And a whole bunch of new, ever more ideologically committed, inexperienced, unskilled, obedient, loyal, bureaucratic microbes come in with the new administration. It happens in Australia, it happens in England, it happens in America. Every bloody government in the world has effectively become a short-term banana republic concentrated purely on staying in power. But there have been a couple of interesting curveballs thrown out by the President Musk, Vice President Trump administration. One curious idea is Trump has decided that because he's promoting cryptocurrency and Bitcoin's apparently going gangbusters at the moment because Trump is promoting cryptocurrency, he's decided the way to deal with America's national debt is for the government to invest in cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. He wants to buy 200,000 Bitcoins for the American government. He wants to pay for these Bitcoins with gold bullion from Fort Knox. The problem with that is there's a story that Fort Knox has been selling the same gold bars more than once. So multiple people all think they own the gold that's being stored for them in Fort Knox by a gold bullion trading company. But it just strikes me that the idea of selling gold bullion in order to buy paper money that is only granted existence by the presence of an electric grid feeding the server farm on which the Bitcoin blockchain is being calculated and stored. So as soon as you get any kind of an interruption to the electric power, once your uninterruptible end quote power supply runs flat, then all your Bitcoin evaporates because nobody else has got any record of it. That's the whole point of it. And to be frank, the cryptocurrency market is behaving rather like a famous Dutch tulip bulb market did 450 years ago. There hasn't been any change in the boom-bust cycle run by the capitalist economy by for-profit, proprietary limited corporations, companies. People who throw their money in one pot in order to finance an expedition to go to the other side of the world and by force of arms capture the islands where the nutmeg is grown. Like, you know, the Dutch East Indies Corporation, the first proprietary limited company on the planet. Their business model has been followed by everybody who's walked down the track after it. And now Donald Trump wants to solve America's international debt with Bitcoins. That's a pretty hilarious prospect. I still don't know whether he's going to get inaugurated. I just can't make myself believe that the US Joint Chiefs of Staff are going to let that happen, especially with all the information that's coming out regarding the connections between Mr. Musk, the Chinese government, the Russian government and the Iranian government. As somebody said in a meme posted on YouTube where I saw it, if you deport Musk for lying on his citizenship application, then you can nationalise his companies and you can use Tesla and SpaceX to solve the national debt. I'm pretty sure that's going to be more functional as a plan than turning gold into theoretical paper that only exists in ones and zeros stored on a computer memory depending on the grid. But you know, what would I know? Being but a simple hillbilly. Going along remarkably well. 48 kilometres an hour coming up that hill, and I haven't ridden it for 6 days. 89% of the battery remaining. I particularly hope this camera's behaving itself, doing all the right things. Showing the horizon with just a little bit of the instrument panel on the bottom of the frame. On the matter of how much money it costs to get enough solar gear to recharge an electric vehicle, because I'm living in Australia and I paid in Australian dollars, and Australian dollars are only worth about 61 American cents at the moment. For my figures to make sense, that needs to be dealt with. The other thing is, my figures are based on what I paid, including goods and services tax, which is 10%. So there's no point worrying about the correlation between what you pay for the solar gear and the size of the motor, and there's no point worrying about the correlation between what you pay for the solar gear and what you paid for the electric vehicle. What matters is how big is the battery on the electric vehicle that you want to recharge. As I said, we're going to go by the scenic route, which has been done up, but bits of it are fairly bumpy. This is the good bit of the road. I'm getting a fair bit of wind noise around my head. I don't know what the microphone's like on the camera. It's very popular to have 5-acre blocks. And there we go, once again there's somebody who has to advertise the fact that they know they're living in Australia by flying an Australian flag. I used to get pretty excited about folding and unfolding and raising flags and doing all the drills when I was about 6 years old. In Lord Baden-Powell's Boy Scouting Cubs movement. I thought it was something most people outgrew. Woohoo! We have walkers. Doing 47s, it's as good as I can get. 80's not on the list of available options. Oh, there's the Golf Links Road betterment sign. I bet we get to the turn off and it turns to lumpy, bumpy potholes. Yep, golf course goes off to the left and the road gets narrow. So I will stand on the pegs. Take a bit of weight off. Oh, we've got some potholes here. Lumpity bumpity. Over there on the right, there's an electricity substation. Once upon a time, some bloody comedians decided to get a length of chain and throw it over the fence. Short circuit the bloody whole place. Blacked out the town, so they did. They knew what they were doing. They also shut off the alarms and the electric door locks at the local RSL club. They robbed the bloody poker machines while the town was blacked out. You'd almost have to imagine that they had some inside information on how the system worked in order to figure it out, but I don't think they ever were caught. They've never done it again though. RSL Club's probably got an uninterrupted power supply, or uninterruptible, to run its burglar alarm. But yeah, this 33 km/h maximum type, fast as I want to ride on it road, is an example of bitumenising the horse and cart tracks in the 1950s when wool was worth £1 a pound, providing material for the uniforms with which Britain and America were fighting the Korean War, and they expected to fight the Third World War in Europe. So Australian sheep farmers were making a heap of money, and all the local shires bitumenised everything they could get their sights on. And then since the 1950s this has just been potholed and patched and patched and potholed and re-bitumened and resealed over the top of the potholes. And as you saw, the bit that runs from the New England Highway to the golf club, that got fixed. Because the people who patronise the golf club, apparently, they have some political clout in the local government scenes. And now as we approach the wider highway, we get another nice road. Not for far though. Then we get onto the glider. 81% of the battery remaining, 15 kilometres from my place, so this is about as far as the post office is. But taking the scenic route, we're going the long way around. And ideally, by the time the sun gets low enough on the horizon to be much of a factor, we should have it at our back going home. How's that for a panorama? And I think we'll go from here up to that microwave tower on top of Martin's Lookout. Across the highway from us is the Glenliness Model Aircraft Flyers paddock. It's sort of over there. And up here, look how narrow the shoulder is. This is one of those problems you get where some roads, it's a bit difficult when you got maybe 15 centimetres between the central lane markers, and bugger all bitumen once you get outside the fog line. And that's what wing mirrors are for, isn't it? .48 kilometres an hour, 17 kilometres from home, 79% of the battery remaining. And a lovely day for a ride, Sunday afternoon. 20 to 6 Eastern Daylight Saving Time, so technically 20 to 5. And as a topic to chat about, how's the airline industry looking these days? Interesting little story with the one in Russia. Internal domestic aircraft flying passengers around got shot up the arse over Grozny because they were defending against a drone attack, and apparently the Russian air traffic controller said, oh no, you can't land at any of the nearest runways, you've got to go out over the Caspian Sea and see if you can get control of the aeroplane and do your level best to pull off a landing over there. And almost half the passengers survived. Basically anybody who was sitting behind the wind trailing edge strapped into that part of the rear fuselage, they all got away with it. Everybody else, brown bread. Which, I'm sure as you know, that would be Cockney rhyming slang for dead. I don't think there's any way you can get from here around to the Red Range Road on this side of Martin's Lookout. 77 kilometres percent of the battery, 47 kilometres an hour, 19 clicks from home. And yeah, here we go. Double yellow line. I'm riding on the fog line, and I've got a car up my arse. This is why I don't try to ride to Wytaliba. And not only would I have to take the, I don't think there's any way to get from here Red Range Road, the Glenlee Road. But we should probably take a detour via the Lookout. So yeah, that's one interesting airline incident. The other one is the strange thing that happened at, I think, Muan Airport in South Korea. If you've been living under a rock, the very brief outline is that twin-engine airliner, Boeing 737, fairly old one, on a stabilised approach with its flaps down and its slots open and its undercarriage dangling down, all set up for landing. Got told there were some birds by the control tower, and then they hit some birds. And they were videoed having puff, puff, puffs coming out of their right-hand engine. And then they declared they were going to have an emergency and abort that landing. And then they suddenly declared that they wanted to turn around and land backwards on the same runway. And 3 minutes and 19 seconds after they declared the emergency from running into the birds, they were back on the ground, but this time they didn't have their wheels down, they didn't have their flaps down, they didn't have their leading edge slats open. What they did have was the thrust reverser open on their right engine, which had seen a couple of birds go bang, 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 dong. And they landed hot and fast and long, and they had no undercarriage, so they sunk all the way down into ground effect. And I think they were doing like 150 miles an hour when they went off the end of the runway, and then 300 metres past the end of the runway, they ran into a concrete reinforced earth wall berm, and the top of the dirt was 2 metres high. And then there was a big slab of concrete on top of that, and the slab of concrete, it had vertical walls going down into the dirt. It was a very, very heavily reinforced earth bank levee, L-E-V-E-E. And of course everybody in other countries has been tearing their hair out, frothing at the mouth, saying, what sort of idiotic half-wit would put such a heavy-duty obstacle up there on a bloody runway for any aeroplane to run into? And it's a bit like the bird strike. That aerodrome is smack dab in the middle of about 5 different wetlands where birds nest and where they forage for food. So build an airport there just because it's flat and open and easy to build an airport, and you can guarantee that you are going to have bird strikes. It has the highest bird strike rate of any airport in South Korea, apparently. So why would you want to build an airport in the middle of a bird strike zone, surrounded by wetlands? Well, there must have been some sort of political pressure brought along the lines of build it and they will come, because if they expected 2 million passenger movements per week or per month, they never got as many as 50,000. So it was only ever coming up to 20-25% of the expected utilisation as an airport. Not good at all, you know. Quite upsetting for the people who invested in it. But building an airport in Korea, close to the ocean, surrounded by wetlands, in an area that gets hit by typhoons quite often, does it surprise anybody to learn that they actually had some interesting building regulations regarding being strong enough and heavy enough that it doesn't get washed away in a flood? So to conform with the South Korean civil engineering flood tolerance construction code, that's why the frangible localizer radar antenna mounting, which was, you know, the concrete was supposed to be flush with the ground level, But to stop the antenna from being washed away in the flood, the clever little Korean civil engineering contractor raised the level of the ground 2 metres so that they didn't have to go and buy expensive, delicate, welded Warren girders made out of steel tubing to suspend the aerial on and then have it get washed away when a flood come along. They raised the level of the ground and then they put the frangible antenna mounting at the new ground level. Because the civil engineer was only thinking about complying with the flood regulations, and the bloke who wanted the airport built was only thinking about the cheapest possible way to meet the regulations. And the people who dreamt up the flood tolerant civil engineering regulations, they never considered the idea of keeping an unobstructed overrun area at the end of a runway, when you're going to have great big fat heavy aeroplanes landing with a fair chunk of kerosene on them because they might have to go somewhere else if they arrive where they're headed to. And when they get there, they discover the weather's no good for landing. And yeah, I was right, it was the bloody red range road I was talking about. I really should stop second guessing myself when I'm narrating. But to be honest, if I stopped second guessing myself, I'd probably get into all manner of shit. Now we're 23 kilometres away from home, doing 47, 48 kilometres an hour. And we've got 72% of the battery left. Well, when I was a kid, this was just a farm track. Now for a while, it's bitumen, and once again, 5-acre lots, well-established houses with big garages and horse trailers. Lots of solar on there, no connection to the grid that I can see. Good on them. Fewer stockyards, so they're still working the land. Hopefully I don't get bushed because I've only been on this road once. And that was coming back the other way, but I'm pretty sure I know where I am. Turn left, continues on to Ramsey Crescent. If you turn right there, you go down to the strawberry patch. But up along here, there's a road off to the right. So anyway, getting back to that Edinburgh Street, that Korean airliner, there's a lot of head scratching going on as to why they would land immediately after declaring a bird strike and an emergency, because usually the aeroplane's quite capable of flying on one engine, and you'd power up the other engine, you'd climb away and you'd sort yourself out, run through some checklists, and 20 minutes later, when you knew what you wanted to do, you'd come on down and land. There's even more head scratching going on about when they were already on a stabilised approach and they had everything ready to land and they had the runway in sight, wheels down, flaps down, slats down, at the correct speed range. Why the hell would you want to climb up and go away? Why not just keep on going down the glide slope and land? Get the thing on the ground. So there's one answer, which is that if there was also a bird strike on the left engine, that would perhaps fill the cockpit with smoke, panic them. If there was a bird strike on the right engine, and we saw that one, that would fill the cabin with smoke. Anyway, when they were coming in on approach and they were being photographed from the front, you could see that the left-hand engine had no hot fumes coming out of it at all. And the right-hand engine, the one that copped the birds going into it, not only did it have its thrust reverser operated and actuated and open, making thrust going the wrong way, but also it had blurriness of the optical illusion, or the optical refraction, caused by really hot air being thrown forwards by the thrust reverser, because that engine was burning fuel, it was turning air into thrust, and it was pushing the thrust out in front of the engine. So the right-hand engine that everybody saw copping the bird strike, it was running, but it was running in reverse. So a lot of the pundits have said, well, what possibly happened, probably happened, maybe happened, who bloody knows what happened, but what's a reasonable sort of a guess is that the birds went into the engine, pop, 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 snap, crackle. They declared the emergency, and as they were climbing out, they would have been climbing out on the thrust of the left-hand engine on its more or less flight idle, you know, ready to land. They might have had more power on it than that, don't know. But anyway, 27 kilometres, 68% remaining. We're doing 47, slight downhill slope. So the theory is, as they were preparing to climb out, think about life, the universe and everything, and run all their checklists, what's gone on is they've shut down the left engine, which was not hit by birds, by mistake. And that's left them, because the right-hand engine's probably got its thrust reverser at that stage, maybe knocked open by the birds, maybe its thrust reverser was sucked in. Because they'd shut the engine down when they applied the thrust reverser, after realising that they were landing too far down the runway at way too high a speed and they weren't going to stop, maybe they tried the thrust reverser. I don't know. It would certainly account for the visual appearance of the aeroplane coming down just before it touched down, with hot air being blown in front of the right-hand engine, which was probably at flight idle from the bird strike, or close to flight idle, however much power they use while motoring down the glide slope. And instead of getting to do their checklist, they've shut down the wrong engine. And at that point, they've sucked up the undercarriage and they've sucked up the flaps and they've closed the slats to try and stretch their glide so they could get onto the runway. That's their major priority. They get onto the runway and find they've got way too much speed and the bees dig too much height. .47 going down the hill, 66% of the battery remaining. 29 kilometres from home, but we are headed home. Quite a nice little town, isn't it? Once upon a time, the highway used to turn left here to go through the main street. And this is another bit of the never ever dug up but constantly repatched road. This stopped being the highway in 1966. I was in infant school. All the traffic from Sydney to Brisbane from World War II, when the Americans actually bitumened the highway. Until then it was a dirt road. But yeah, all the highway traffic used to have to come along here through the middle of town, and then there was another set of S-bends up at the far end of the town. Which I suppose we might as well do for the fun of it. But this is the old main street. One of my subscribers has a motorcycle parked in the main street. I'm sure he will enjoy seeing his motorcycle on my YouTube video. There you go, Daz. Can't really see it's well lit from there because I can't really point the camera too well. That previous corner, the road from Grafton used to turn around that corner, and at this one it used to turn left to go to Inverell. So Glen Innes was at the crossroads of two highways, and the crossroads of both of them went right through the main street. That building there used to be the National Parks and Wildlife when I was a kid. And across the road where the sports ground is, Wilson Park, that used to be the police paddock for holding impounded horses and cows and sheep. Yeah, in 1966, 65, I think Christmas 65, there was a carload of people coming along here going towards the golf club to attend a Christmas party. And in those days this road had the right of way, not the Grafton Street. Is it Grafton Street? No, it's not. Yeah, it is Grafton Street. See, I shouldn't bloody well correct myself. The Grafton Street, basically town bypass. If you're on the wider highway, a lot of trucks go that way. Why would you fight your way through town when you can go along there? But this is another patch of road that's never been remade since it stopped down the highway. And it's not quite painful to ride on, but it's bloody rough. Anyway, the carload of revellers failed to take this corner in front of us, and that was when they finally decided to move the highway. And in 1966, when I was in kindergarten, there was an awful lot of noise going on Church Street as the highway got moved. "34 kilometres down to 60% of a battery." Probably all that poking around on the dirt roads extended the battery life. Because what slows you down is aerodynamics. As speed doubles, aerodynamic drag squares. Hopefully the sky's not too light. with a camera's charged couple device. But to finish that story about the Korean airliner crashing, apparently the idea that they only ever got 20 or 25% of their expected number of aircraft movements and passenger movements through the airport, that was all before COVID. Since COVID, I think they're down around half what they used to have before COVID. It's just a classic example of the cargo cult mentality that motivates the people who believe in the tourism industry. Build it and they will come. The local bloody council got involved in a scheme like that about 15 years ago. We used to have an airport with an old airline terminal building and an aero club building. And there was an airport manager's house, lovely house, brick house, connected with power, all the mod cons. They'd already taken away the fuel bowsers because not enough aeroplanes stayed there to buy enough fuel to cover the cost of maintaining an underground fuel bowser. But there was a man called Hanford, and you see him on the media anytime there's an aeroplane crash or an airline business scandal going on, the media turns to him for an opinion. And he was promoting a scheme to get a local council to donate to him their airport so he could then get a development application put through, and then he could entice an airline in China to give him a contract to train a whole bunch of pilots at the airport. And he promised various municipalities all manner of wonderful propositions, and everybody told him to go away. And Glen Innes Council failed to take the warning by other people's behaviour, and they said, oh yeah, come and have a go here. So they sold him the airport. Mind you, had a 5,500, or maybe it was a 6,000 foot sealed runway with lights, and a cross strip 8,500 feet long gravel. The bitumen runway was built by the American Construction Battalion, so it was really built well. It didn't get a pothole from 1943 to 1976. That was the first time the local council had to resurface it. And until Kingsford Smith Airport was extended into Botany Bay, Glen Innes actually had the longest sealed runway in New South Wales. It's a really good airport. But just never enough people wanted to fly from Glen Innes to Sydney to make it worth doing. If you fly from Sydney to Glen Innes to Inverell and then back to Sydney, you get enough passengers between Inverell and Glen Innes to break even in the quiet times. You'll have half the aeroplane full. And then Christmas and Easter and school holidays, the aeroplane will be full, and that's when you make a bit of money. Well, the businessmen in town at the end of the 1970s, they badly wanted to be able to fly down to Sydney in the morning, do 3 hours of work in George Street and then fly home again in the afternoon. They wanted to do that because there was one member of the New England Club who had a student pilot's licence, and he had a mate who flew the Ted Smith Aerostar, very fast twin engine, sort of an executive passenger plane, sometimes used for fast little domestic cargo flights, and they had the contract to fly around all the little country towns and collect the previous day's magnetic computer memory tapes from the banks. And all the banks kicked in to cover this one aeroplane picking up a bag full of computer tapes from every town and take them down to Sydney so that they could be fed into the mainstream computer and get the previous day's transactions processed. So this car salesman, he'd go out there at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. I used to work for him. I've driven him out there, put him on the aeroplane. He's flown down to Sydney, caught a taxi from Mascot to York Toyota, and he's done the paperwork and collected a brand new Toyota, whether it's a Corolla or a Celica, it doesn't matter, but if it was a Celica, he could do Sydney to Glen Innes, come and via Gosford and a couple of goat tracks he knew, and he could do it in 5 hours. So I've literally put him on the aeroplane at Glen Innes at 9 in the morning. At midday he's gone across the harbour bridge in a wax-coated Celica with traders plates on it, and as I was shutting the doors on the workshop at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he's come up the concrete ramp. And then the next day I've had to steam clean the wax off the car and detail it, and then the next day I've had to shut him out and listen to him tell on the person buying their new car how they've got to drive it gently for the first 10,000 kilometres to break it in, after he's just done 423 miles in 5 hours. So he's averaged over 80 mile an hour from Sydney to Glen Innes. Anyway, he was a member of the New England Club, and all the other businessmen in the New England Club used to feel terribly insecure and inadequate. Their self-esteem would drop when he'd go in there and big note himself about having been to Sydney for the day and done a day's business, and you know, next week he'll sell the car sort of thing. So they harangued and harassed the airlines, and 3 different airlines went broke trying to run a 2 flights per day service to Glen Innes. So by the time Hanford was trying to bludge the bloody aerodrome from the council, and they fell for it, we hadn't had even a triangular once a day flight via Inverell for 10 years, 15 years. Anyway, council succeeded in getting a government grant, whether it was state or federal, I don't know, to put the sewerage on to the airport, so that Hanford could then go ahead and borrow money and build a row of dormitory accommodation. And he wanted to have a kitchen and a recreation room and facilities out there for all these Chinese student pilots that were going to come along. And he was talking in the newspaper in town about how there's going to be all these jobs for locals as kitchen hands and cleaners and making beds, but everybody was going to have to learn how to talk in Chinese. I'm just going to move this kangaroo. Because next time I'm coming along here, I might actually need that patch of road. I'm sorry, girlie. Off with it. There we go. You lie over there beside the fence. And now no birds are going to get killed. Part of the fun of riding a tiny little, very slow electric motorbike. Yeah, so anyway, Hanford gets the bloody government to give the local council the money to put the sewerage works on, and they did the job. And at the time, my daughter, at the time, my son was, he was captain of the Rediston Bushfire Brigade, and their fire station is on the airport. And I thought, oh well, if nothing else, at least the airport firefighting, the fire station, will get the septic on. However, Hanford, if he'd got the first council that he approached on board, he probably might have pulled it off. But by the time he was talking in Glen Innes, before he'd got the airport signed over to him, the Chinese airlines were already operating training schools all over the west coast of America, and whereas Hanford wanted the Glen Innes labourers and cleaners and bed makers and cooks to be able to speak Chinese to make the little students feel more at ease, according to Aerospace Smithsonian magazine, where I read the story about the American flying schools training Chinamen to fly airliners, the whole reason they were sending their student pilots to the west was so they could practice up their English skills. So Hanford was going to win absolutely no points at all whatsoever by telling the Chinese airlines that, oh yes, and I've got all the local yokels going to Tech to learn how to speak Cantonese or Mandarin, because that was not what the Chinese wanted. So lo and behold, neither Hanford nor anybody else ever got a contract to train anybody, let alone a bridging finance loan to allow him to build his flying school and his dormitory suburbs and all the rest of it. And when I was talking to my son and asking him whether the fire station at least got a septic tank connected to the Glen Innes sewerage works, the answer was, oh no. You got to have enough people sitting on the toilet to flush 600 turds per day from the airport to the sewerage farm, otherwise the bloody pipeline will block and dry up and go wrong. So they've got a government subsidised sewerage pipeline to the airport, and even at the time I knew there was something going to go wrong with his bloody flying school. I figured Hanford's probably angling towards the day when he can put in a development application for an air park with a whole lot of little 5-acre blocks all the way around the runway's edge on the perimeter track. But the problem is Australia doesn't have a big enough aviation community to support any such thing. Certainly not 250 miles by road from Brisbane and 423 by road from Sydney. So I just don't see that one being any sort of a proposition. And from memory, there's another kangaroo on the road up here. Bloody fun, got a truck up the arse. Yes, there is. Right on my neighbour's driveway. But, as I said, sometimes I need that patch of bitumen outside the fog line. Little boy this time. There you go, mate. You can rest under a tree. Poor little bugger. Look, wild native parsnip, tracking mean incisor. It's not just grown at my place, but of course there's not too many sheep out here. You'd nearly think somebody's tried hard to hit that fella. Some arsehole. Like to think of themselves as being heroes if they test their bull bar. Yeah. Takes a little bit of the shine off it when you've got to stop and take the dead wildlife off the road. Can't say they smell too bloody good either. Yeah, 43 at 44 kilometres. And 44% of the battery remaining. Yeah, so now they've still got the old terminal building, and the clubhouse is still there, and the hangar's still out there. But the 3-bedroom brick manager's place, because that was going to be in the way, the council had decided to sell the airport for a peppercorn to Mr. Hanford's company. They also authorised one of the councillors to buy that house and have it jacked up and transported and put on his family property. So I'm sure somebody thought it was all a good idea. I'm just not one of those people. Hope that snake gets away with it. It did not appear to be flattened, but it was a red-bellied black snake on the road. Had one at my place yesterday, but then again I had some mice at my place the other night, so hopefully the mice will feed the snake. Grass beside the roads looking terribly bloody dry. I think I've currently spent about 9 hours brush cutting with a string on my neighbour's side of the fence up there near my front gate. Try and make it a little bit more difficult in the event of a grass fire coming along. Which, as I recall it, I spoke about at the start of the video, so that's a nice circular narrative. The weather is definitely becoming more intense and more extreme. I'm absolutely delighted that it's as cool as it is here, because pretty much everywhere except the northeast corner of New South Wales has got a bloody heat wave going on at the moment. I must have got my rain dance fairly well fine-tuned, I suppose, particularly with that 40 millimetres of rain just before the hot weather's likely to come in. In the same sense that there's not much point having a God theory unless you've got a powerful God theory. Probably not much point doing a rain dance unless you know how to make it work. And at the moment, I'm pretty pleased with my rain dance. Yes, I am sort of wending my way between the cow pats. Not that they're fresh and wet and splattery at the moment, but I still don't think it's a good practice to deliberately ride through cow shit unless you have to. Yeah, so right at the moment, the Glennis Airport's not only got no aerial service, they haven't even got a crop duster out there because the council decided that right at the height of fire season, they're going to resurface the runway with bitumen. So if you needed to land fire bombers there and conduct a campaign, you couldn't do it. 40% battery capacity remaining. Moo cows on the hill. So there we go. I can't claim to have solved any great major problems. Had a bit of a laugh at the idea of Donald Trump wanting to fix America's national debt with Bitcoin. I think that's a really, really great way to make sure that the people who sell the Bitcoins to America wind up with all the friggin' gold in Fort Knox, and America winds up with absolutely fucking no currency reserves at all whatsoever. But what would I know? I am but the fool on the hill. So, can we see that? Yeah, we can. 3066, 1 hour and 14 minutes, 51 maximum speed, 47 kilometre trip, 38 kilometres average. Did that show up? Probably bloody not, because I haven't got 3 hands. Such is life. Warbles on a lot of YouTube. Hope you enjoyed the ride. Ciao. There we go. 39% remaining. Using 49 watt hours per kilometre for the previous final kilometre. 47 kilometre trip. I'm pretty happy with that.